The clock on the wall showed 8:30 p.m. when Sarah Martinez picked up her cleaning cloth for the 100th time that evening. Her feet hurt from standing all day, and her back ached from carrying heavy trays of food. She had been working at Romano's restaurant for 3 long years, and every day felt the same. Wipe tables, take orders, serve food, smile at customers, and try not to think about her dreams. Sarah was 26 years old, but she felt much older. Life had not been kind to her. When she was a child, she loved music more than anything else. In the world, her mother had saved money for months to buy her an old piano from a garage sale. Sarah would sit at that piano for hours, playing songs she heard on the radio or making up her own melodies. Her fingers danced on the keys like magic. Music filled their small apartment with joy. But dreams don't pay the bills. When Sarah's mother got sick, all the money went to doctors and medicine. The piano had to be sold. Sarah had to quit high school and find work to help her family. Her mother died 2 years later, leaving Sarah alone in the world with nothing but memories of music that once made her happy. Now she worked at Romano's, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Rich people came here to eat fancy food and show off their money. Sarah served them with a smile, but inside she felt invisible. These people looked right through her, as if she was just another piece of furniture in the room. Tonight was busier than usual. The restaurant was full of well-dressed men and women talking loudly about their businesses and vacations. Sarah moved between the tables quickly, trying to keep up with all the orders, hummed softly while she worked, a habit she had picked up years ago. It was a piece by Chopin, something she had learned to play when she was 15. The melody helped her feel calm during busy nights like this. At exactly 9 p.m., a man walked into the restaurant alone. Sarah noticed him immediately because everyone else in the room noticed him too. He was tall and wore a suit that probably cost more than Sarah made in 3 months. His hair was perfectly styled, and he walked like he owned the world. The other customers whispered to each other, pointing at him with excitement. "That's Marcus Wellington," she heard one woman say to her friend. "He owns half the buildings in this city. He's worth millions." Sarah had heard the name before. Marcus Wellington was famous for buying old buildings, tearing them down, and building expensive apartments that regular people could never afford. He was known for being tough in business and getting whatever he wanted. The newspapers wrote about him all the time, calling him ruthless but successful. The restaurant manager, Mr. Peterson, rushed over to greet Marcus personally. He led him to table 12, the best table in the house, with a perfect view of the city lights. Sarah watched from across the room as Mr. Peterson bowed and smiled, acting like Marcus was a king visiting his kingdom. "Sarah," Mr. Peterson called out, his voice nervous and excited, "you will take care of Mr. Wellington tonight. Give him anything he wants, and don't make any mistakes." Sarah's heart started beating faster. She had served rich people before, but never someone this famous and powerful. She picked up a menu and a glass of water, took a deep breath, and walked over to table 12. Marcus Wellington was looking at his phone when she approached. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His eyes were cold and calculating, like he was always thinking about his next business deal. He wore a watch that sparkled with diamonds, and his hands looked like they had never done any hard work. "Good evening, sir," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Welcome to Romano's. Can I start you with something to drink?" Marcus looked up from his phone, and Sarah felt his eyes studying her face. She had learned to avoid eye contact with customers like him, but something about his stare made her look back. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Water is fine," Marcus said finally. His voice was deep and confident, the voice of someone used to giving orders. "I'll need a few minutes to look at the menu." Sarah nodded and started to walk away. But then, something terrible happened. As she turned, her elbow bumped the water glass she had just placed on the table. The glass fell to the floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces.
Yes.
Sending water and ice everywhere, the sound of breaking glass echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot.
Ow.
Every conversation stopped.
Oh, man.
Every head turned to look at Sarah, who was now kneeling on the floor, frantically trying to pick up the pieces of broken glass. Her face burned with embarrassment, and she could feel tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, sir," she whispered, not daring to look up at Marcus. "I'm so sorry. I'll clean this up right away." She expected him to yell at her, or demand to speak to the manager, or storm out of the restaurant. Rich people hated when things went wrong, and Marcus Wellington had a reputation for being especially difficult. But instead of anger, Sarah heard something unexpected. Marcus was humming. She looked up in surprise and saw that he was humming the same Chopin melody she had been humming earlier while she worked. The same complex piece that most people had never heard before. His eyes were watching her with a strange expression, not angry, but curious. "Nocturne in E-flat major," Marcus said quietly, so only Sarah could hear. "Opus 9, number 2. You were humming it perfectly while you worked." Sarah's hands froze in the middle of picking up glass. How did he know? How could he possibly know what she had been humming? She had been so quiet and the restaurant had been so noisy. "You know, Chapin," Marcus continued, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, like he had discovered something important about her. I used to play piano," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A long time ago." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, and suddenly Sarah felt like she was the only person in the room. His cold eyes had changed, becoming interested and alert, like a hunter who had found an unexpected prize. "How long ago?" he asked. 10 years, Sarah said, still kneeling among the broken glass. "I haven't played in 10 years. Marcus smiled then, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had just thought of something very interesting, something that could be useful to him. "Stand up," he said, and his voice carried an authority that made Sarah obey without thinking. "Someone else can clean that." Up. As if by magic, another waiter appeared with a broom and dustpan. Sarah stood slowly, her legs shaking, wondering what was going to happen next. Marcus was still looking at her with that calculating stare, like he was solving a puzzle in his mind. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah Martinez, sir." "Well, Sarah Martinez," Marcus said, sitting back in his chair like a king on his throne. "I think we need to have a conversation about music." At that moment, Sarah didn't know that her life was about to change forever. She didn't know that this powerful man had just decided she was going to be part of his world, whether she wanted to be or not. All she knew was that the way he was looking at her made her feel both terrified and strangely hopeful at the same time. The broken glass had been cleaned up, but something else had been broken too, the invisible wall that had kept Sarah's past. Buried and forgotten. Marcus Wellington had seen through her waitress uniform and discovered the musician she used to be, and he wasn't going to let her forget it. Sarah barely slept that night. She kept thinking about Marcus Wellington and the way he had looked at her when he discovered she knew classical music. His cold eyes had lit up with interest, like he had found something valuable that he wanted to own. The conversation had ended abruptly when other customers needed her attention. But Marcus had left a huge tip and a business card with just his name on it. The next day at work, Sarah tried to forget about the strange encounter. She hoped Marcus would never come back to the restaurant. Rich people like him usually ate at different places every night, showing off their wealth in new locations. But deep down, she had a feeling that their meeting was not over. At exactly 7 p.m., Marcus walked through the restaurant doors again. This time, he was not alone. 3 other men in expensive suits followed behind him, all looking important and powerful. Sarah recognized the type businessmen who made deals worth millions of dollars and thought regular people existed only to serve them. Mr. Peterson rushed over to greet them, his hands shaking with excitement. Having 4 wealthy men in his restaurant at the same time was like winning the lottery. He led them to the large corner table that could seat 8 people, the most expensive spot in the entire restaurant. "Sarah," Mr. Peterson whispered urgently as she tried to hide behind the kitchen door. "Mr. Wellington specifically asked for you to be their server tonight. Don't mess this up. These men could make our restaurant famous." Sarah's stomach felt sick as she walked toward their table. Marcus was sitting at the head of the table like a king, with his 3 friends arranged around him. They were all older men with gray hair and serious faces, the kind of people who decided the fate of entire companies over dinner. "What, gentlemen?" Marcus said as Sarah approached. "This is Sarah, the young lady I was telling you about." The 3 men looked at Sarah with curiosity. One of them, a fat man with a thick mustache, smiled in a way that made Sarah uncomfortable. Another man, thin and pale like a ghost, studied her through expensive glasses. The third man, who had silver hair and looked like a movie star, nodded politely but said nothing. "Good evening," Sarah said, trying to sound professional.
What?
"Can I bring you to drink tonight?" He ordered wine that cost more per bottle than Sarah made in a week. As she wrote down their order, she could hear them talking about business deals, stock prices, and investments. They spoke in numbers that were so large Sarah couldn't even imagine that much money. For the next 2 hours, Sarah served their dinner and tried to stay invisible. The men ate slowly, talking and laughing about things she didn't understand. Marcus seemed to be the leader of the group, and the others listened carefully to everything he said. Several times Sarah caught him watching her as she worked, that same calculating look in his eyes. When the dinner dishes were cleared away and the restaurant began to empty, Sarah hoped the evening was finally over. She was counting her tips in the back room when Mr. Peterson found her, his face flushed with excitement and nervousness. "Sarah," he said, wringing his hands, "Mr. Wellington wants to speak with you." "He's waiting in the private dining room." Sarah's heart sank. The private dining room was where the restaurant held special events and parties. It had fancy decorations, expensive furniture, and most importantly, an old grand piano that had been there since the restaurant opened 20 years ago. "What does he want?" Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. He didn't say. Mr. Peterson lied, but his eyes told Sarah that he knew exactly what Marcus wanted. "Just go. Don't keep him waiting." Sarah walked slowly toward the private dining room, her feet feeling heavy with each step. She found Marcus and his 3 friends sitting in comfortable chairs arranged in a semicircle. The room was dimly lit, and the black piano sat in the center like a sleeping giant. "Ah, Sarah," Marcus said, standing up as she entered. "Please, come in. We've been waiting for you." Sarah stood by the door, ready to run if necessary. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Marcus walked over to the piano and ran his hand along its polished surface. "This is a beautiful instrument," he said, not looking at her. "A 1985 Steinway grand piano.
Ah.
It's worth more than most people's houses." The fat man with the mustache chuckled. "Marcus has excellent taste in pianos," he said. "Ass. 3 of them in his mansion." "I've spoken with your manager," Marcus continued, finally turning to look at Sarah. "He's given us permission to use this room for a private concert you're going to play for us." Sarah felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Can't," she said quickly. "I told you yesterday, I haven't played in 10 years. I don't even remember how." "Everyone remembers how to ride a bicycle," the thin, pale man said with a cold smile. "Piano is the same thing. Once you learn, you never really forget." "But I'm just a waitress," Sarah protested, her voice getting higher with panic. "I'm not. A performer. I can't play for people like you." Marcus stepped closer to her, and Sarah could smell his expensive cologne. His presence filled the room like a dark cloud, making her feel small and powerless. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I don't think you understand. This isn't a request. Your manager has already agreed. Your shift is over, but your evening is just beginning." "I could lose my job," Sarah whispered, though she knew it was a weak excuse. The silver-haired man who looked like a movie star finally spoke. "Young lady, do you know who we are? Marcus Wellington doesn't just own buildings. He owns people's futures. He could buy this restaurant tomorrow if he wanted to. He could buy 10 restaurants. Your job is safe as long as you cooperate." Sarah looked around the room, feeling trapped like a mouse surrounded by cats. The 4 men were all watching her, waiting for her to give in. She thought about running away, quitting her job, moving to another city. But she had no money, no car, and nowhere to go. "I don't have any sheet music," she said desperately, looking for any excuse. Marcus smiled and pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "I brought some," he said, placing it on the piano. "Simple pieces. Nothing too difficult for someone with your ... background." Sarah walked slowly to the piano, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. The bench was the perfect height, and when she lifted the lid, the keys were clean and perfectly tuned, and her hands shook as she opened the folder. Marcus had given her. The first piece was Far Elise by Beethoven, one of the most famous piano pieces in the world. It was something every piano student learned, but Sarah hadn't played it in a decade. Her fingers found the keys hesitantly, and she pressed the first note. The sound filled the room like magic. The piano had a rich, warm tone that seemed to wrap around Sarah like a blanket from her childhood. Despite her fear and anger, she felt a tiny spark of joy when she heard that beautiful sound. "Go on, Marcus," said softly. "Don't stop now." Sarah began to play Far Elise, her fingers remembering the melody even though her mind was full of doubt. The notes came slowly at first, then faster as muscle memory took over. She made a few mistakes, but the song was recognizable and beautiful. When she finished, the four men applauded politely. The fat man with the mustache was smiling widely, and even the cold, thin man looked impressed. "Excellent," Marcus said, closing the piano lid gently. "You'll play for us again tomorrow night. Same time, same place." Sarah stared at him in shock. "Tomorrow? I thought this was just once." "Nothing worthwhile happens just once," Marcus interrupted. "Talent like yours needs to be shared. We'll see you tomorrow evening, Sarah. Don't disappoint us." As the four men filed out of the room, Sarah sat alone at the piano bench, her hands still trembling. She had been trapped, forced into something she didn't want to do. But the worst part was the tiny voice in her head that had to admit the truth. Playing piano again had felt wonderful, and that scared her more than anything Marcus Wellington could do to her. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus Wellington first forced Sarah to play piano. Her life had become a nightmare she couldn't escape. Every single night, like clockwork, Marcus would arrive at the restaurant with different groups of wealthy friends, business partners, or important clients. And every single night, Sarah was expected to perform for them after her regular shift ended. Word had spread quickly through the restaurant. Staff about Sarah's special arrangement with the famous Tycoon. Some of her co-workers were jealous, thinking she was lucky to get attention from such a powerful man. Others felt sorry for her, seeing how tired and stressed she looked every day. But everyone treated her differently now, like she was no longer one of them. "You're so lucky," said Maria, another waitress who had worked at Romano's for 5 years. "Marcus Wellington is one of the richest men in the city. Maybe he'll help you become famous." Sarah wanted to scream that she didn't feel lucky at all. She felt like a prisoner who had to smile and pretend everything was wonderful. But she couldn't explain to Maria or anyone else how trapped she really was. They wouldn't understand that Marcus's attention felt more like a curse than a blessing. Every morning, Sarah woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest, knowing that another performance was waiting for her at the end of the day. Her hands had started to hurt from playing piano after years of not practicing. Her fingers were soft from waitressing, not tough like a real pianist should be. Marcus didn't care about her comfort or pain. Mr. Peterson, the restaurant manager, was happier than Sarah had ever seen him. The restaurant was busier than ever before, with people hoping to catch a glimpse of Marcus Wellington or hear Sarah play. Wealthy customers who had never come to Romano's before were making reservations, and the restaurant was fully booked every night. "Sarah, you're bringing us so much business," Mr. Peterson said with a big smile. "Mr. Wellington's friends are telling other rich people about our restaurant. We're becoming famous because of you." Sarah didn't feel like she was becoming famous. She felt like she was becoming a performing animal in a zoo, something people came to stare at for entertainment. Marcus had turned her into a tourist attraction, and she hated every minute of it. The worst part was that Marcus seemed to enjoy watching her struggle. Each night, he would bring different pieces of sheet music, always choosing songs that were more difficult than the ones before. He would sit in his chair like a king watching a servant, his cold eyes studying every mistake she made. "Tonight you'll play Rachmaninoff," Marcus announced one evening, placing a thick folder of music on the piano. It's a prelude in C-sharp minor. It's one of the most challenging pieces ever written. Sarah stared at the sheet music in horror. The pages were covered with thousands of tiny notes, like black ants crawling across white paper. This wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. For someone who hadn't practiced seriously in 10 years, "I can't play this," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "It's too hard." I need months of practice for something like this." Marcus's business partner that night, a woman with short blonde hair and diamond earrings, laughed coldly. "If you can't handle challenging music, perhaps you shouldn't call yourself a pianist." "I never called myself a pianist," Sarah replied, feeling anger rise in her chest. "I'm a waitress who used to play piano as a child. There's a big difference." Marcus stood up from his chair and walked over to the piano bench where Sarah was sitting. He placed his hand on her shoulder, and Sarah could feel the weight of his control pressing down on her. "Sarah," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "you have two choices. You can try to play this piece, or you can find yourself a new job tomorrow morning. And I promise you, finding work in this city will be very difficult once word gets out that you disappointed me." Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Instead, she turned to the first page of the Rachmaninoff piece and placed her fingers on the keys. The music was impossibly complex, with notes that jumped all over the keyboard faster than her fingers could follow. She stumbled through the first few measures, making mistake after mistake. Her hands cramped up, and sweat dripped down her forehead from the effort and stress. Marcus's guests whispered to each other, some looking embarrassed for her, others seeming annoyed that the entertainment wasn't good enough. Sarah wanted to run away from the piano, from the restaurant, from her entire life. But she kept playing, forcing her fingers to move even when they hurt. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, Sarah finally gave up. She pulled her hands away from the keys and sat in silence, staring down at her lap. Room was quiet except for the sound of her heavy breathing. "That's enough for tonight," Marcus said finally, his voice showing no emotion. "We'll try again tomorrow." As his guests filed out of the room, making polite comments about the interesting performance, Sarah remained at the piano bench. Her hands were shaking, and she felt sick to her stomach. This was becoming worse every night, and she didn't know how much more she could take the next evening. Marcus arrived with a different group, 3 young men who looked like they were trying to impress him. They wore expensive clothes but seemed nervous and eager to please, like students trying to get good grades from a strict teacher. "Gentlemen," Marcus announced, "tonight you'll hear something special. Sarah is going to play a piece she knows." "Very well." He placed a simple sheet of music on the piano, Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. It was a beautiful, sad piece that Sarah had learned when she was 16. She actually did know this one well, or at least she used to, but something strange happened when Sarah began to play. Instead of feeling relieved that the music was easier, she felt angry. Angry at Marcus for controlling her life, angry at herself for letting him do it, and angry at the unfairness of her situation. That anger flowed through her fingers into the music, making the sad melody sound even more emotional and powerful. 3 young men stopped talking and listened in silence. Even Marcus seemed surprised by the intensity of Sarah's playing. For a few minutes, Sarah forgot about her audience and played the way she used to when she was alone in her childhood apartment, pouring her heart into the music. When the song ended, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. One of the young men had tears in his eyes, and even Marcus looked thoughtful instead of his usual calculating expression. "Beautiful," whispered one of Marcus's guests. "I've never heard it played with such feeling." But instead of feeling proud, Sarah felt empty and used. Marcus had seen her real emotions, her pain and anger, and he had used them to entertain his friends. He had taken something private and personal and turned it into a show. "Same time tomorrow," Marcus said as they prepared to leave. "I have some very important clients coming. Don't disappoint me." As Sarah sat alone at the piano after everyone had gone, she realized that Marcus wasn't just stealing her time or her energy. He was stealing her soul, piece by piece, performance by performance. She didn't know how to stop him. The piano keys felt cold under her fingers as she touched them one last time before closing the lid. Tomorrow would bring another performance, another group of wealthy strangers, and another piece of herself that Marcus would take away. But somewhere deep inside, a small flame of rebellion was starting to grow. 1 month had passed since Sarah's nightmare began, and she was falling apart. Dark circles hung under her eyes like purple bruises, and her hands shook even when she wasn't playing piano. She had lost weight because stress made it hard to eat, and her coworkers whispered that she looked like a ghost walking through the restaurant. Sarah's apartment had become a prison where she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling and dreading the next evening's performance. Her body ached constantly, her back hurt from tension. Her fingers were sore from playing difficult music, and headaches pounded behind her eyes every day. But the worst pain was in her heart, where her love for music was slowly dying under Marcus's demands. The other waitresses had stopped being jealous of Sarah's special treatment. Even Maria, who used to think Sarah was lucky, now looked at her with pity and concern. "Sarah, you look terrible," Maria said during their lunch break. "When was the last time you had a full night's sleep?" Sarah couldn't remember. After performing for Marcus, she would lie in bed replaying the evening's humiliation. Every mistake she made, every cold look from Marcus's guests, every moment she felt like a trained monkey performing tricks for rich people's entertainment. "I'm fine," Sarah lied, but her voice was so weak that even she didn't believe it. "You're not fine," Maria insisted. "You need to tell Mr. Peterson you can't keep doing this. It's killing you." But Sarah knew she couldn't quit. Marcus had made it clear that crossing him would mean losing her job and being blacklisted from other restaurants in the city. She was trapped with no way out, slowly drowning in a life she never chose. That Friday evening, Sarah's worst nightmare came true. Marcus arrived at the restaurant with the largest group he had ever brought, 8 people dressed in clothes that cost more than most people's cars. These weren't just wealthy business partners. These were the kind of people who appeared on magazine covers and decided the fate of entire countries with their money. Mr. Peterson was so excited he could barely contain himself. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "these are some of the most powerful people in the world. Whatever Mr. Wellington asks you to play tonight, you have to be perfect. This could make our restaurant internationally famous." Sarah felt sick as she looked at the group of strangers who would be judging her performance. There was an older woman dripping with diamonds who looked at Sarah like she was examining a piece of meat at the market. A young man with perfectly styled hair was already taking pictures with his expensive phone, probably planning to post about the evening on social media. Everyone in the group radiated wealth and power, and they all expected to be entertained. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced as they settled into the private dining room, "tonight you're going to hear something truly special. I've discovered a hidden talent right here in this little restaurant." Sarah hated the way he talked about her, like she was a rare animal he had found in the wild. She wasn't his discovery. She was a person with feelings and dreams that he had crushed under. His expensive shoes. Marcus placed a thick folder of sheet music on the piano, and Sarah's heart sank when she saw what he had chosen. It was Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, one of the most technically difficult pieces ever written for piano. The music was so complex that even professional concert pianists sometimes struggled with it. "I can't play this," Sarah said quietly, hoping the guests wouldn't hear her desperation. "It's impossible. I need years of practice for something this difficult." Marcus's eyes went cold as ice. "Sarah," he said in a voice that carried across the entire room, "these important people have come here specifically to hear you play. Don't embarrass me in front of my friends." The diamond-covered woman laughed like broken glass. "Marcus, darling, perhaps your little waitress isn't as talented as you thought." The young man with the styled hair looked up from his phone with a cruel smile. "This is already boring. I thought you promised us a real show." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks as the group of strangers judged her before she had even tried to play. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the pages of the sheet music. The notes swam before her eyes like black tadpoles, impossible to read clearly. She placed her fingers on the piano keys and tried to begin the piece. The opening notes were supposed to be soft and mysterious, but her hands were trembling so much that the music sounded clumsy and amateur. She made it through the first few measures before her fingers completely betrayed her. Her left hand cramped up in the middle of a difficult passage, and she hit several wrong notes at once. The sound was horrible, like someone dropping a tray of dishes. Sarah tried to keep going, but her right hand was shaking so badly that she couldn't find the correct keys. The audience started to whisper among themselves, their voices filled with disappointment and annoyance. The diamond woman rolled her eyes and checked her expensive watch. The young man was recording Sarah's failure on his phone, probably planning to share it with his friends later as a joke. "Stop," Marcus said sharply, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. Sarah's hands froze above the keys. The room fell silent except for the sound of her heavy breathing. She could feel sweat dripping down her back, and her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode. Marcus stood up from his chair, his face dark with anger and embarrassment. For the first time since their arrangement began, Sarah saw him lose his perfect control. His reputation was being damaged in front of these powerful people, and it was all her fault. "I apologize," Marcus said to his guests, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Seems our entertainment for the evening is not up to standard." The diamond woman gathered her purse with an annoyed sigh. "Marcus, darling, next time make sure your little pets are properly trained before you show them off." One by one, Marcus's important guests filed out of the room, making comments about wasted evenings and disappointing performances. Sarah sat frozen at the piano bench, watching her public humiliation destroy Marcus's carefully planned evening. When the last guest had left, Marcus turned to face Sarah. His eyes were colder than she had ever seen them, filled with a fury that made her want to disappear completely. "You have embarrassed me," he said slowly, each word dripping with venom, in front of some of the most important people in this city. "I tried," Sarah whispered, tears finally starting to fall down her cheeks. "I told you it was too difficult. Trying isn't good enough," Marcus snapped. "I don't invest in failures, Sarah. I invest in winners. And tonight, you proved that you're nothing but a mediocre waitress pretending to be something special." Sarah felt something break inside her chest. Not just her heart, but something deeper, her spirit, her sense of self-worth, everything that made her who she was. Marcus had finally succeeded in crushing her completely. "You're right," she said quietly, standing up from the piano bench on unsteady legs. "I'm not special. I'm just a waitress who used to play piano badly 10 years ago. I never wanted to be. Your entertainment? I never asked for any of this." Marcus stared at her, surprised by her honesty. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I quit," Sarah said, the words coming out stronger than she felt. "Find someone else to humiliate for your friend's amusement." She walked toward the door, expecting Marcus to threaten her job or her future in the city, but he said nothing. Sarah reached the doorway. She turned back one last time to look at the piano that had become both her torture and her salvation. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to rebuild her life. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, she would sleep without dreading the next performance. The breaking point had finally come, and Sarah had chosen freedom over fear. 3 days had passed since Sarah quit, and she felt like a different person. For the first time in weeks, she had slept through the night without nightmares about piano performances. Her hands had stopped shaking, and the dark circles under her eyes were starting to fade. She was still working at Romano's. Mr. Peterson had begged her to stay, promising that Marcus would never bother her again. But Sarah knew better. Men like Marcus Wellington didn't give up when they lost something they wanted. She could feel him watching her from across the city, planning his next move like a chess player thinking 5 steps ahead. On Wednesday evening, Sarah was cleaning tables near the front window when she saw a familiar black car pull up outside the restaurant. Her heart started beating faster as Marcus stepped out, alone this time. He walked through the front door with his usual confident stride, but something was different about him. His perfect suit was slightly wrinkled and his hair wasn't styled. As carefully as usual, Mr. Peterson rushed over to greet him, but Marcus waved him away with an impatient gesture. He walked straight to table 12, the same table where their story had begun, and sat down heavily, like a man carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. "Sarah," Mr. Peterson whispered urgently, "he's asking for you specifically, says. He won't speak to anyone else." Sarah felt her stomach clench with fear and anger. "I told you I'm done with his games. Send Maria to take his order." "He's not ordering food," Mr. Peterson said, looking nervous and confused. He just wants to talk to you, he said. It's important. Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself walking toward table 12. Marcus looked up as she approached, and she was surprised to see something she had never seen before in his cold eyes: uncertainty. "Sit down, please," Marcus said, quietly gesturing to the chair across from him. "I prefer to stand," Sarah replied, crossing her arms defensively. "What do you want?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Sarah had ever heard it. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words seeming to hurt him as they came out. "What I did to you was wrong. I treated you like an object instead of a person, and I'm sorry." Sarah stared at him in shock. In all the weeks she had known Marcus Wellington, she had never heard him apologize to anyone for anything. He was a man who took what he wanted and never looked back. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked suspiciously. "What do you really want?" Marcus looked up at her with tired eyes. "I want to make you an offer, a real offer this time, not a demand." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, placing it carefully on the table between them. Sarah could see that it was thick with papers, like a contract or legal document. "I've arranged for you to audition at the Central Music Academy," Marcus said. "They have a scholarship program for talented adults who want to return to music. Full tuition, living expenses, everything paid for 3 years." Sarah felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. The Central Music Academy was the most prestigious music school in the country. Students from around the world competed for the chance to study there, and most of them had been preparing their entire lives. "Why would you do this?" Sarah whispered, afraid to believe what she was hearing. Marcus leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked almost human, instead of like a cold business machine. "Because I heard you play that night," he said quietly. "Not the performances I forced you to give, but the real music that came from your heart. When you played Moonlight Sonata with all that anger and pain, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she fought them back. She couldn't trust Marcus, not after everything he had put her through. "This could be a trick," she said. "You could be lying to get me to play for you." Again, Marcus shook his head slowly. "There's one condition for the scholarship, and it's not what you think. You have to promise me that you'll never play for me again. Not ever." Sarah stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand." "I realized something after you quit," Marcus explained, his voice growing even quieter. "It was killing the thing I claimed. To admire every time I forced you to perform, I was destroying a little bit of your love for music. I turned something beautiful into something painful, and that makes me a monster." The restaurant around them seemed to fade away as Sarah tried to process what Marcus was telling her. This powerful man who had controlled her life for weeks was suddenly offering her everything she had ever dreamed of. "The audition is tomorrow afternoon," Marcus continued, pushing the envelope toward her. "Everything you need is in there. The address, the time, the pieces they want you to prepare. They're expecting you." Sarah picked up the envelope with shaking hands. Inside, she could see official letterhead from the Central Music Academy and documents that looked legitimate and real. "Why?" she asked again, still not understanding Marcus's motivation. Marcus stood up from his chair, straightening his suit jacket. "Because I destroyed something precious, and now I'm trying to fix it. Because you have a gift that deserves to be nurtured, not exploited. And because... ... He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Because I want to do one good thing with all this money and power I've accumulated." He started to walk away, then turned back one more time. "Sarah," he said, "when you're studying at the academy, when you're performing in concert halls around the world, I want you to remember that your music has the power to change people. It changed me, and I didn't think that was possible." Walked out of the restaurant, Sarah sat down heavily in his chair, staring at the envelope in her hands. Everything she had ever wanted was right there, a chance to study music seriously, to become the pianist she had dreamed of being as a child, to turn her talent into something beautiful instead of something painful. The next afternoon, Sarah stood outside the Central Music Academy, wearing her best dress and carrying the simple sheet music she had chosen for her audition. Her hands weren't shaken anymore. Her heart was full of hope instead of fear. Inside the audition room, she found a beautiful grand piano, much like the one at Romano's. But this time nobody was watching her with cold, calculating eyes. The professors who listened to her play were kind and encouraging. And when Sarah began to perform the piece she had written years ago during her mother's illness, she played it with all the love and pain and hope in her heart. When the last note faded away, the room was silent for a long moment. Then one of the professors smiled and said words that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. "Welcome to the Central Music Academy, Miss Martinez. We're honored to have you." 6 months later, Sarah sat at a piano in one of the academy's practice rooms, working on a piece by Chopin, the same composer Marcus had recognized in her humming that first night. But now the music flowed from her fingers like water, free and pure and beautiful. She never saw Marcus Wellington again. But sometimes she wondered if he was out there somewhere, listening to music and remembering the night of Broken Waitress. Taught a powerful man that some things in life are more valuable than money or control. Sarah had found her voice again, and this time nobody could take it away from her.